They filmed themselves holding the thing that would kill them, smiling for the camera, promising the people watching that they knew exactly what they were doing, and every one of them was already dead. They just didn't know it yet. Let's start with the man they called South Africa's Steve Irwin. October the 28th, 2024, a reptile farm in the KwaZulu-Natal Midlands, South Africa. Dinkelman was 44 years old. Born in Pietermaritzburg, South Africa, he had spent 2 decades working with reptiles before he ever picked up a camera. He worked for the Natal Parks Board. He built a name as a wildlife rescuer, the guy local farmers called when a black mamba turned up in a chicken coop or a python got into a ceiling. In 2020, he turned that reputation into a YouTube channel. 4 years later, it had over 111,000 subscribers, over 646,000 followers on Instagram, and close to 3 million views a month. He was a Discovery Channel wildlife presenter. He had a wife, Christy, and 3 children, Taylor, Maddie, and Rex. He kept a pet giraffe named Elliot on the property. His most watched upload was called Black Mamba Handling Masterclass. Here's the detail that should stop you before the story even starts. Dinkelman was allergic to snake venom, not cautious around it, not had a bad reaction once. Allergic, in the clinical sense, the same category of allergy that turns a bee sting into a hospital visit for some people. Except his trigger was one of the most dangerous compounds a reptile can produce. He knew this about his own body. He built a business, a following, and a legacy around handling the exact substance his immune system was primed to treat as an attack. I want to sit with that for a second because it's not reckless in the way you'd expect. He wasn't an amateur showing off it. He was arguably the most experienced handler in the region. His failure wasn't a lack of skill, it was a decision, made over and over to keep working with animals his own body could not safely encounter. Because the work and the audience and the identity built around both mattered more than the risk sitting quietly underneath every single video. Before we get to what happened next, quick pause. We're doing a $100 Amazon gift card giveaway the moment this channel hits 1,000 subscribers. Picked at random from everyone subscribed at that point. Free to enter, cost you nothing but a click. And it helps this channel keep finding cases like this one and telling them properly. Now, back to the mamba. On the day of the bite, Dinkelman was doing conservation work with one of his snakes, an eastern green mamba. Eastern green mambas are not the most venomous snake in Africa. They're not even the deadliest snake on his own property. What makes them dangerous is speed. An adult can move at close to 11 kilometers an hour through branches, striking multiple times in a single encounter. And its venom is a fast-acting cocktail of neurotoxins and cardiotoxins that can shut down a victim's ability to breathe in under 30 minutes if the dose and the response are bad enough. For most people, a green mamba bite is a race against time. For Dinkelman, the bite itself was only the first problem. The second problem was his own body. Within minutes, his body went into anaphylactic shock. This is not simply venom sickness. Anaphylaxis is the immune system's own emergency response, overreacting so violently that it can close the airway and crash blood pressure on its own, independent of whatever the venom is doing. Doctors were treating 2 life-threatening processes running in parallel: the neurotoxic effects of the mamba bite and a full-body allergic collapse layered on top of it. He was placed on a ventilator and put into a medically induced coma to keep his body stable enough to fight both at once. The coma lasted nearly a month. For 28 days, his wife and 3 children waited, while machines did the breathing his body could no longer manage on its own. On October the 28th, 2024, Graham Dingo Dinkelman died. Cause of death: complications from a venomous snake bite, compounded by anaphylactic shock. His wife Christy wrote afterward that he fought incredibly hard throughout this very difficult period, and that his compassion extended to every creature he worked with, not just the ones people found beautiful. There is no footage of the bite itself. The incident happened during routine handling work, not while filming, and South African wildlife authorities classify workplace snakebite incidents involving licensed keepers as private medical matters rather than public record unless negligence is alleged. No negligence was alleged. The video that exists is the one his fans already had, the Black Mamba Handling Masterclass, recorded months earlier. The same species, the same steady hands. No idea that the file already sitting on his channel would outlive him. The mamba was not euthanized. It was returned to secure enclosure at the property Dinkelman built, one animal among over 100 that his family decided to keep and continue caring for after his death. According to statements from those close to the family, his son Rex was 9 years old. An allergy didn't kill Graham Dinkelman by accident. It killed him because he never let it change what he did for a living. Keep that detail in your head, because the next case is not about an accident either. It's about a man who was bitten, felt it happening, and told the people around him not to call for help. Not because he didn't understand what a rattlesnake could do, but because in his world, calling for help was the actual sin. October 1998, Old Rock House Holiness Church on Sand Mountain in northeast Alabama. A small wooden church, the kind with no air conditioning and a congregation that knew each other's names for 3 generations back. Inside, a service was underway. Singing, tambourines, and a wooden box on the floor with a 3-foot yellow timber rattlesnake coiled inside it, waiting to be lifted. The man who reached for it was John Wayne Punkin Brown Jr., 34 years old. He wasn't a visitor to this world, he was born into it. His parents ran a snake-handling church of their own in Marshall, North Carolina. By the time he died, Brown had been bitten 22 times over 18 years of handling. 22 bites, and every single time, he had gotten back up, healed, and picked up another snake at the next service. To his congregation, that wasn't reckless. That was proof. Here's the credential nobody talks about. Surviving 22 bites doesn't make the 23rd one safer. If anything, repeated venom exposure can sensitize the immune system the same way it did for Dinkelman. Every bite is a fresh roll, not a stacking defense. Punkin Brown's faith told him the opposite. It told him that 22 survivals were 22 proofs God was protecting him, and that the correct response to a 23rd bite wasn't caution. It was more faith. That night, the rattlesnake bit him at the base of his left middle finger. He staggered, but he didn't leave the church floor. When someone asked if he wanted a doctor, witnesses say he simply shook his head and pointed up at the ceiling. Not out of shock, but as an answer. He believed the same power that had carried him through the last 22 bites would carry him through this one too. He did not want an ambulance. He wanted everyone in that room to keep believing what he believed. He collapsed roughly 10 minutes after the bite. Timber rattlesnake venom is a mix of hemotoxins that begin breaking down blood vessels and blood clotting ability almost immediately, and in a healthy adult male, 10 minutes is an aggressive timeline for a fatal collapse. It usually signals either a very large venom dose or a bite that landed close to a vein. He was pronounced dead in the church he refused to leave. The detail that makes this case different from every other snakebite death in this video. Punkin Brown had already lost his wife to a snakebite 3 years earlier. Melinda Brown died in August of 1995, bitten during a service in Kentucky, under the same doctrine, in the same tradition, refusing the same kind of help. Punkin didn't leave the practice after burying her. He kept handling. He remarried the belief system, if not another person, and 3 years later the exact same cause of death took him too. They left 5 children behind. Jonathan was 12. Jacob and Jeremiah were both 7. Sarah was 5. Daniel was 4. All 5 were now orphaned by the same species of animal, inside the same religious conviction, within a single decade. There is no video of the bite. Old Rock House Holiness Church did not record its services for broadcast in 1998. This was a private congregation, not a media operation, and the only accounts that exist come from witnesses who were standing in the room. The snake was not killed. In serpent-handling churches, a snake that bites a handler is typically viewed as having done exactly what a snake does. The animal isn't blamed, and it's returned to its box for the next service. If you think refusing medical care 10 minutes from death is as far as faith can push a person past the point of survival, wait until you hear about the man who did the exact same thing on national television. Except this time, cameras were already rolling because reality TV had turned his church into a show. February the 15th, 2014. Full Gospel Tabernacle in Jesus' Name. Middlesboro, Kentucky. By now, cameras weren't a novelty in this world anymore. This church had spent the last year with a National Geographic film crew documenting its services for a series called Snake Salvation. The man leading the congregation that night was used to being watched. He was not used to being wrong about what would happen next. Jamie Coots was 42 years old, and he was not a first-generation believer. He was third-generation. His grandfather, Tommy Coots, founded the church in 1978. His father, Gregory Coots, led it after him. Jamie inherited the pulpit the way other men inherit a family business. The customers, the reputation, the risk. He also inherited the cameras. National Geographic wasn't the first outsider to find the Coots family interesting. Snake-handling churches in Appalachia had been a subject of fascination and documentary attention for decades before Jamie ever stepped in front of a lens, which meant he grew up understanding, on some level, that people outside his faith were always going to be watching. By 2014, he had already survived 8 prior snakebites. In 1993, one nearly killed him. In 1998, he lost part of a finger to another. And in 1995, a 28-year-old congregant died from a snakebite during a service. Not at the church, but in Coots' own home. Sit with that specific fact for a second. because it separates this case from every other name in this video. Coots didn't just survive close calls himself. He led a service in which someone else, a young man in his own congregation, died from the exact practice Coots continued teaching for the next 19 years. He buried that congregant and kept handling the following Sunday. That's the failure at the center of this case. Not ignorance, and not a single reckless decision. It's a 19-year pattern of surviving personal near-deaths and burying someone else's death, and treating both as confirmation rather than warning. Coots had also been arrested less than a year before his own death, pulled over on Interstate 75 in January of 2013, transporting 5 venomous snakes, including copperheads and timber rattlesnakes, without a permit. He pleaded guilty to illegal wildlife possession and was sentenced to 1 year of unsupervised probation. He kept handling anyway. Faith in his church wasn't a metaphor you performed on Sundays. It was the entire operating system, and it did not have an exception clause for prior evidence. On February the 15th, a rattlesnake bit Coots on his right hand during the service. He dropped it, and for a moment it looked like the congregation might respond the way any of us would. Instead, he composed himself and continued the ceremony. He finished the service he was leading, bitten hand and all, before anyone discussed what came next. What came next was the same decision that had already killed a man in his own living room, 19 years earlier. His family refused medical treatment on his behalf, citing the same religious conviction the entire church operated under. Rattlesnake venom is primarily hemotoxic. It breaks down tissue, disrupts blood clotting, and can trigger internal bleeding and organ failure over a period of hours rather than minutes, which means Jamie Coots had time. Hours of it. Time in which a hospital 11 minutes away could very plausibly have saved him. He died at home instead. His son, Cody Coots, took over as pastor of Full Gospel Tabernacle immediately after his father's death. The son who watched his father continue his service with a swelling hand did not leave the practice. He led the next one. The National Geographic crew had cameras rolling for the series throughout that period, but not inside the private moments after the bite. Coots' death occurred at his home, off camera, surrounded by family who made the decision to keep it that way. What footage exists from Snake Salvation shows him alive, mid-sermon, snake in hand, in episodes that aired for months afterward to an audience that already knew how the story ended. The snake that bit him was not killed. Timber rattlesnakes in these congregations are typically kept, not destroyed. The animal is understood to have simply done what a snake does. 3 generations, 1 family, 1 church, and at least 2 confirmed deaths from the same specific act, 20 years apart. If you think a family passing this decision down through its own bloodline is the most extreme version of this belief, the next case will change your mind because the next man didn't just refuse an ambulance for himself. He watched his own father die exactly the same way years earlier, and still waited 8 hours before letting anyone call for help. Late May 2012. An outdoor evangelistic gathering in a state park roughly 80 miles west of Bluefield, in the isolated southern tip of West Virginia. No church walls here, just a clearing, folding chairs, and a congregation that had driven in from 3 counties to hear a preacher whose family name was already known across the region for one specific reason. Mack Wolford was 44 years old. His father had also been a serpent-handling preacher, and in 1983 his father died from a snakebite too. Mack didn't leave the tradition after burying him. He became one of its most visible defenders, a man who had already survived multiple bites, including 4 separate copperhead bites that left scars across his right hand, and who spoke about faith and snake handling to reporters with a clarity that made him something like a spokesman for a practice most of the country considered a relic. Here's the quote that explains everything that happened next, in his own words, given to a reporter before this final service. "You can't go to the hospital, there is not a lot they can do. But seeking medical help means you're already starting to lose faith." That sentence isn't a man who doesn't understand what a hospital does. It's a man who has fully priced in what a hospital could do for him, and decided that using it would cost him something he valued more than his own survival odds. During the outdoor service, Wolford was handling a yellow timber rattlesnake when it bit him. Unlike Coots, unlike Brown, Wolford didn't collapse in the moment or die within minutes. His body fought the venom for hours while he made a very deliberate choice in real time. He did not ask anyone to call for help. Timber rattlesnake venom breaks down slowly. Clotting factors fail. Tissue around the bite site begins dying. And without antivenom, the body is essentially bleeding internally while looking, for a while like it might be managing. For 8 hours, Mack Wolford sat with a fatal snakebite inside his own body and told the people around him not to call for paramedics. 8 hours is not a snap decision made in fear or shock. It's 8 hours of a grown man, fully conscious for at least part of it, actively holding back the one intervention that had a realistic chance of saving him. Because his father had died the same way, doing the same thing, And Mack had built his entire adult identity around the idea that this was not a tragedy to avoid repeating. It was a faith to inherit. Eventually, hours into the ordeal, he gave his family permission to call for help. By the time he reached the hospital in Bluefield, he was already dead. There's no footage of the bite. This was a private outdoor gathering, not a filmed broadcast, and the only accounts come from family and congregants who were present. The rattlesnake was not killed. In this tradition, as in the others, the animal isn't blamed for the bite. It did what a wild animal does when handled. The blame, if the community assigns any at all, never lands on the snake. 2 generations, the same species of snake, the same specific window between symptom and death, and the same decision made twice by a father and then by his son, except the son held out 3 times longer than the fatal instinct required. Every case so far has one thing in common: faith telling a man not to seek help. The next case has no religion in it at all. It's a performer, on stage in front of a paying crowd, and the thing that stopped him from getting to a hospital wasn't God. It was the show. March 22, 2004. Phrai Bueng, Thailand. A performance space, not a church. An audience that had paid to watch a man do something no sane person would attempt twice, let alone as a career. Boonreung Buachan was 34 years old and, by the standards of his profession, a legend. 6 years earlier, in 1998, he had earned a Guinness World Record for spending 7 consecutive days sealed inside a glass container filled with live snakes, cobras among them. That record wasn't a stunt he did once for a title. It was the foundation of an entire performing career built on convincing paying audiences that his control over venomous snakes was absolute, repeatable, and safe enough to sell tickets to. Here's the specific failure baked into that kind of career. The more times you perform a dangerous act without incident, the more the audience, and the performer, start treating the danger as theater rather than fact. A world record for 7 days inside a box of cobras isn't proof the snakes were ever safe. It's proof he got lucky over and over in front of witnesses until the luck became indistinguishable from skill in everyone's mind, including his own. During a regular performance, a cobra bit him. In the exact moment when a performer with genuine respect for the animal would have stopped the show and gotten to a hospital, Buachan did neither. He drank herbal medicine and whiskey, a folk treatment with no clinical basis against cobra venom whatsoever, and kept performing in front of the crowd that had paid to see him finish. He kept performing after the bite instead of stopping. The same discipline that had carried him through 7 days in a glass box, 6 years earlier now working against him, keeping him upright through the exact window when leaving for a hospital, could still have mattered. He collapsed mid-performance. Cobra venom is neurotoxic, and depending on species and dose, it can begin shutting down breathing within 30 minutes to a few hours. A window Buachan spent drinking whiskey and finishing a show instead of getting into a vehicle. By the time anyone moved him toward Phrai Bueng Hospital, he was already unconscious. He never woke up. The detail that makes this case different from a religious refusal of medicine: nobody told Buachan not to seek help. No doctrine stopped him. The show did. Stopping mid-performance to treat a bite would have meant admitting in front of the exact audience his entire income depended on that the danger was real, and he chose the whiskey and the ovation over the ambulance. His death was documented closely enough that National Geographic later featured it in an episode of Hunter Hunted called Victims of Venom. He was posthumously awarded a Darwin Award, an informal, often morbid honor given to deaths caused by remarkably poor decision-making, which tells you exactly how the outside world read what happened to him. There's no footage of the fatal bite itself readily available in the public record. Performance venues of that era and location did not maintain the kind of continuous archival footage a modern livestream would. What survives is the reputation, the 7-day record, the crowds, and the ending neither matched. If a man can drink whiskey and finish a cobra act with venom already moving through his bloodstream because the crowd was watching, ask yourself what an audience of 111,000 subscribers might convince someone to keep doing. The final case in this video isn't about faith, and it isn't about performance either. It's about a professional with no religious conviction and no audience at all, working completely alone, undone by something as ordinary as forgetting to move an animal back to its enclosure before cleaning its cage. July the 1st, 2021, early afternoon. Thiruvananthapuram Zoo, the capital city zoo of the Indian state of Kerala. No pulpit, no congregation, no camera crew. Just a man alone with a job to do, cleaning an enclosure that housed one of the most dangerous animals on the planet. Harshad was 45 years old from Amburi Panchayat in Katakata Taluk. He had worked as an animal keeper at the zoo for 4 years. 4 years is not nothing. Long enough to know the animal's habits. Long enough to have done this exact task dozens of times before. Long enough to stop treating the procedure as something that required his full, undivided attention every single time. That's the failure in this case, and it's the most ordinary one in the entire video. Competence curdling into routine. Nobody handed him a shortcut. He built it himself, one uneventful cleaning shift at a time, until the extra step of securing the animal first stopped feeling necessary and started feeling like wasted motion. The animal in his care that day was a king cobra, Ophiophagus hanna, the longest venomous snake on Earth. Adults regularly reach 3 to 4 meters in length, with some individuals recorded past 5 meters. A king cobra's venom is primarily neurotoxic, attacking the nervous system rather than the blood. And while its venom yield per bite is lower in concentration than some other cobra species, it delivers an enormous volume, enough neurotoxin in a single bite, according to toxicologists, to kill roughly 20 adult humans. The mechanism is specific and brutal. The neurotoxins block signal transmission between nerves and muscles, and if the dose is large enough, they shut down the diaphragm entirely. Victims don't bleed to death. They suffocate fully conscious while their own chest stops moving. Unlike the mamba, the rattlesnakes, and the cobra in the earlier cases, a king cobra bite from a full adult can deliver a dose large enough that even rapid anti-venom treatment is a race against a very short clock. Some documented envenomations have caused death or respiratory failure in well under an hour. That morning, Harshad's task required him to briefly relocate the king cobra out of its main enclosure and into a smaller holding cage, so he could clean the primary space. Standard procedure. He completed that step correctly, but when he turned his attention to the smaller cage and noticed it was also dirty, he made the decision that cost him his life. Instead of returning the cobra to a secure space first, he attempted to clean the smaller cage with the snake still inside it, still within striking range while working entirely alone with no second keeper present to assist or raise an alarm. I want to be precise about what killed him here because it wasn't a failure of experience. It was a shortcut, the kind every experienced person eventually takes, because doing the extra step 999 times without incident quietly rewrites what necessary means in your head. The king cobra struck during the cleaning. There was no one else in the enclosure area to witness the exact moment, and no one to immediately intervene. Harshad was still slightly conscious when co-workers found him and rushed him to Thiruvananthapuram Medical College. He did not survive the trip. He was pronounced dead before reaching the hospital. The neurotoxic collapse from a full-strength king cobra envenomation, delivered to a healthy adult male working alone with no antivenom immediately on hand, moved faster than the drive into the city. The zoo authorities filed a case of unnatural death, standard procedure in Kerala for any workplace fatality involving a wild animal, pending a post-mortem investigation into the exact circumstances, whether protocol had been violated, whether a second keeper should legally have been present for that specific task, whether the smaller holding cage had adequate separation for solo cleaning at all, became part of that inquiry. The same questions any workplace death involving dangerous machinery would raise, except the machinery here could think, and struck without warning. There is no footage of the bite. Zoo enclosures used for maintenance work are typically not under continuous camera coverage the way public-facing exhibits are, and Kerala State Wildlife Authorities treat active workplace death investigations as restricted records until the post-mortem and inquiry conclude. The king cobra itself was not destroyed. It remained in the zoo's collection and continued being displayed to the public in the same facility where it killed the man whose job was to care for it. Harshad's family were not the ones who decided to keep the cobra on display. That decision belonged entirely to the institution, made within days of his death, while the post-mortem was still open and his co-workers were still being questioned about a task he had done alone hundreds of times before. Correctly, until the one time it mattered. I've covered 6 men in this video. This is the one that stayed with me the longest. Not because the danger was greater, but because there was no faith to blame. No father to imitate, no camera to perform for. Just an ordinary Thursday afternoon, a job he was good at, and a snake that was never the one that failed. If you want another one, there's a video on your screen right now. Same rule, same species, same margin between routine and the last time. And if you're new here, subscribe before you go. That giveaway hits at 1,000 and every single one of you gets us closer to it.